Hello, my name is Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt, with another entry on representations of disability in North American film. Today I'm going to reflect on representations of intellectual disability in Hollywood, and I'll reserve a few words towards the end for Hal Ashby's Being There. I'm going to open with a content warning that concerns not Hal Ashby's film, which I'll discuss later, but a warning that applies to my very own introduction to the film. Today's trigger warning is for all of you who, like me, react negatively to words that have the potential to deepen instead of lessening stigma. Disability scholars, activists, and their allies tend to think carefully about the words they use when describing intellectual or physical difference. We often say individuals with disabilities instead of disabled individuals, a reminder that no disability should be a person's defining attribute unless they wish it to be, which some actually do. It's always a good idea to ask someone what nomenclature they prefer. We also try to minimize our use of figures of speech that inadvertently reinforce ableist prejudice. If I accuse someone of being deaf because they cannot recall instructions I just gave them, respond to a narrow-minded observation with, "What? Are you blind?" or choose to class someone's poor joke as lame, I essentially reestablish the prejudicial assumption that the physical difference to which I've alluded is a horrifying condition with unequivocally negative connotations. The same goes for words that offensively stigmatize intellectual difference, including labels like idiot, imbecile, and simpleton, all of which once had very specific legal and medical definitions, but now merely signify the malice of the one who utters them. Today, using these words metaphorically concretizes bias unless we use them in a transparently tongue-in-cheek fashion, like this. Intellectual disability remains the unhoused imbecile of modern academia, an untouchable, endlessly circling the Academy's ivory tower. The subject has not even earned the status of a village idiot. Few recognize the topic, let alone poke fun at it as an embarrassing but accepted familiar of the academic community. Issues surrounding intellectual disability do not command the same attention as those other more seasoned identity factors concerned with race, gender, sexual orientation, and class. No humanities journals or conferences foreground cognitive disability and its related concerns. It remains almost exclusively within the purview of medicine and the social sciences. Even among the disability studies faithful, issues surrounding intellectual disability have not commanded the same attention as modes of difference rooted in sensory or mobility impairment. Rosemary Garland Thompson's landmark study, Extraordinary Bodies, barely touches on intellectual disability. Quick references providing only a necessary part of the useful lexicon she provides for the emerging discipline. Sharon Snyder and David Mitchell's narrative prosthesis rightly points out the hierarchies within disability studies that have curtailed more expansive critical exploration of intellectual disability issues, but the authors themselves do not spend more than a page or two on the subject in their now canonical text. For one beautiful moment, the Disability Studies reader edited by Leonard Davis since 1997 did include a chapter which gave voice to individuals with cognitive disabilities under the title, "This is What We Think." The essay, co-written by 10 different activists with intellectual disabilities themselves, appeared in the anthology's third edition back in 2010, and then promptly vanished from subsequent editions. The Academy has yet to fully claim intellectual disability as its own. The primary reason for this oversight undoubtedly lies in the very nature of such cognitive disability. What has an academy of intellects to do with a population defined by varying degrees of intellectual deficiency? It is comparatively easy to champion those disenfranchised because of their skin color, sex, or a physical disability, as long as some meeting of the minds can occur between the victimized individual, the advocate, and representatives of the oppressive government or educational institution. But what if mind itself has been compromised, not temporarily, but permanently? In the 21st century, as in previous centuries, individuals in such situations are invariably swept into custodial care. Why think twice about the academic, political, or even social membership of those who cannot offer what we most value? Enfolding those with intellectual disabilities and layering their experiences into our own discourses about art, education, and society would require questioning prejudices so rooted that most of us have not even begun to recognize them. That high Greco-Roman estimation of human intellect, reestablished in the eras of Renaissance, Enlightenment, and industrialization, has ground the very lenses through which we peer at our modern world. Putting them aside would be, for many, tantamount to expecting better vision after removing one's glasses. Everything from technological innovation to social justice to the creative arts' quest for expression and enlightenment relies, ostensibly at least, on the accumulation, articulation, proper organization, and effective deployment of accessible bodies of knowledge. Extending membership to those of reduced cognitive functioning and perception constitutes a far more involved venture than extending a hand to the sensory or mobility impaired, because it requires far more than mobilizing new resources and reshaping our aesthetic prejudices, challenging enough ends in themselves. Granting partial or at least provisional academic membership to this widely defined population within the humanities, for instance, would require extensive flexibility in the face of current unspoken standards which demand erudition, propriety, and independence from our members. Such a shift would require shaping a sustainable social space that encourages not only coexistence, but honest appreciation of one another's unique experiences, whatever their cognitive health and intellect. And it would require a reassessment of the relative values we award certain elements of human experience. Expressing one's emotions might step up next to explaining one's reasoning. Interdependence claim a spot alongside autonomy, and storytelling climb higher towards the rarefied air accorded scientific analysis. In other words, such a shift would require replotting some of the very points we use to coordinate society's progress, as well as significantly expanding our operational definition of progress. The many factors complicating the adoption of such an accommodating posture and the creation of such a radically inclusive and diverse community are relatively self-evident. In a cultural milieu attentive to surfaces of all kinds, those with significant disabilities born of trauma or congenital conditions face an even steeper uphill battle than the rest of us. For many diagnosed with intellectual disabilities, visible singularities in face, carriage, manner, and emotional expressiveness join already discernible physical disabilities and recurring health problems to make passing in a crowd virtually impossible. Unable to feign the normate's beauty, athleticism, or vocal cadences, these individuals face still greater difficulties when they venture into professional settings. Their mental limitations and conspicuous dependence confound others' narrow prescriptions for success, a predictable result in competitive environments that value solo accomplishments and intellectual gymnastics. Hollywood might be willing to challenge widespread prejudices that concern identity politics, but its progressive momentum often falters when the subject is intellectual disability. For decades, the American movie industry has offered up some critically acclaimed tale that dramatizes in microcosm the challenges our society would face were we to embrace this particular population more fully. A small few have taken the possibility of such relational intimacy seriously, but most have dismissed it as a pipe dream under the guise of either satire or tragedy. Rare are cinematic illustrations of realistic, challenging liaisons like the brotherly bonds depicted in Dominic and Eugene and What's Eating Gilbert Grape. These films openly admit to a never-ending process of relationship building that requires patience, sensitivity, and a firm commitment to a highly interdependent mode of relationship. In other titles, this transformation plays out in more melodramatic fashion. A healthy relationship between the intellectually disadvantaged character and his companion emerges, but only after extended frustration and long, hard effort. The films Rain Man and I Am Sam track the changing relationship between highly motivated, fast-paced, and smart protagonists with little time for emotional intimacy, and the intellectually disabled individuals they crash into in their mad races towards professional success. Sling Blade and Digging to China move in a more tragic direction, implying that sustaining close ties with the intellectually disabled is virtually impossible. Both suggest that it takes a sensitive, imaginative child with a surplus of free time and an absence of grown-up prejudices to connect with an intellectually disabled adult, and that such a bond cannot survive the rigors of reality. Still other films relate the marked transformation of a comparatively normal person which follows upon befriending an intellectually disabled individual. Films such as Pumpkin and Being There turn such encounters to comedic purpose, ridiculing by exaggerating the idea that an individual with an intellectual disability could positively impact an able-minded person. In the latter film, comic legend Peter Sellers plays a character named Chance, a middle-aged man with an intellectual disability whose name betrays his narrative function. Though screenwriters Jerzy Kosinski and Robert C. Jones provide no explicit backstory for their hero, Chance appears to have been raised in secret by a man ashamed of the disabled child that fate thrust on him. Chance knows little about American society besides what he's gleaned from television. So when his father's death thrusts him out into the real world, he must take his chances and accept whatever hand fortune deals him on the streets of Washington, D.C. Remember what I said about the way figurative language tends to mirror our actual beliefs, casually reiterating our values and biases? Well, many people with cognitive disabilities recognize this better than most because they have difficulty distinguishing between the figurative and the literal. Hyperbole, personification, and metaphor present them with quite the conundrum. They cannot easily recognize when someone has taken dramatic liberties with language in order to make a point. When such individuals say something themselves, they expect to be taken literally and would be confused to discover that a listener thought they were trying to be indirect or poetic. The one thing Chance has actual lived experience with is gardening, so he talks about it whenever possible, inserting remarks about the impact of seasonal change on plant growth at the most inopportune moments. Since he wears nice clothing and carries around his father's leather suitcase, however, others assume he knows what he's talking about and interpret his irrelevant contributions as timely, wise reflections on the hidden patterns shaping government, business, and personal relations. Hijinks ensue. What do you think? Is comedy an appropriate way to familiarize us with a disenfranchised people group? Can humor draw serious attention to social injustice? When is it okay to laugh? A quick online search reminds us that while laughter benefits the body as much as the soul, it often demands payment in a pound of someone else's flesh. In a sense, all comedy is slapstick, involves someone being struck for laughs. Whether the blow is verbal or physical, levity at another's expense carries with it the possibility of lasting hurt, injury to the target's feelings, and damage to the aggressor's own capacity for understanding and accepting difference. Or does such a critical stance take too seriously what is most definitely a very funny film? Where should we draw the line?